Atlanta. What part of Atlanta? People say Atlanta, but
I grew up in Buckhead, so
okay.
northwest Atlanta.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
So
went to
you're
school really close to where Karen went to school. So,
sweet.
but
Yeah,
trying to every time I go home, explore a little more, get out of
yeah,
the bubble a little bit.
yeah. And is your family still in Buckhead?
They are. Yep. They all live there. So
Yeah. Well, our pastors, Louis and Shelley Giglio, they live in Buckhead.
yeah, I've been to Fashion City a couple of times and heard
Yeah,
them. So
yeah.
yeah.
So we love
Well,
them.
I met Donell here in Charlottesville. I don't even know what year it is. I've lost track of all time. But yeah, so I don't actually remember the first time we met, but I knew right away that I liked you. I was at your wedding to the sublime Yvonne, so that's one of my high points of my life. But you were here as the campus minister for the InterVarsity chapter of Impact, it was called then, right?
It was
Or was it called One Way?
yeah, One Way.
One
But
Way.
early for me was Impact, but I wasn't campus pastor or anything. But then, yeah.
You were a core leader in our community, and you're still part of the Charlottesville community as a board member at the Center for Christian Study. And Donell now works as the lead trainer in community development for the Lupton Center in Atlanta. And his bio says that he strives to preserve, restore, and develop people and buildings within the Atlanta district, certain neighborhoods, through shepherding both towards Dr. King's philosophy of the beloved community. And of course, Dr. Martin Luther King has deep Atlanta roots. So just so happy, Donell, that you've agreed to spend this time with us. We have until 9 o'clock, almost an hour, just to hear from you and hear from one another. And we're here, like we said, the topic is learning to listen. So it's just a wide open forum for you to be with us. Thank you for coming.
Awesome, awesome. Let's begin then. So I'll begin this way. Fear is essential to our lives. Without it, we would be deprived of our basic needs. Fear is biologically ingrained in all of us. It protects us by giving us an adrenaline boost in response to dangerous situations, allowing us to survive. Fear is also necessary for our progress. It has motivated our greatest inventions and most creative endeavors. But much of the fear that we face today, that fear is a different kind of fear. It is rooted in this unknown, the failure of our lives, the failure of our work. This is fear. The fear of being an imposter, or the fear of being a racist, the fear of rejection, the fear of not being good enough. It's fear based on hate, on envy, and insecurity. It's a fear that poisons our very lives. This is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a sermon that he did entitled The Antidote to Fear. So thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be with you, to feel a little bit of home. I love to get together in spaces, and even on boring study center board calls. It's just like a little piece of home to get to experience and see people that mean so much to me. To old friends like McMahon, who is just such a rich part of time and history in Charlottesville, to the Marsh family, who means so much to my little family, and to even that of my parents. Karen was referring to, I don't know when I met you, my parents pastored First Baptist on Main Street for almost 20 years. And were dear friends of, the Marshes were dear friends of my parents. And Charles and my dad were doing doctoral work at around the same time. And yeah, just a sweet intersection of life. But then when I came on staff at the University of Virginia as the university's first African-American college pastor, this is 2007, which is an amazing honor, but also pretty crazy that in 2007, we were just getting our first African-American college pastor. But that trail, that place had been blazed by so many amazing giants in the world of kind of collegiate parachurch ministry on the grounds of the university. And I was honored to step into this lead role, and I felt cared for deeply, loved even more by this beloved community. And that was in large part because of people like the Marshes. We have such rich history of the Bonhoeffer House and those sweet days where we would gather and walk with students over to get, I think when we were thinking about as InterVarsity, what ministry would look like, what multi-ethnic ministry would look like, we were dreaming about that. Many of those conversations came around the table there at the Bonhoeffer House. And it's sweet for me to look retrospect now and see relationships that were formed there that have gone on from the university and are in life now, married and having kids. And so much of the relationships that are core to them happened and were formed there at the Bonhoeffer House. So thank you so much, Karen, for your commitment, and to Charles, just for the rich legacy that both of you just continue from your parents to now, but even more so for all these people that are on the call. You'll look back in hindsight, will be so 2020, how, and no pun to the year, right? But it will be such a rich moment in your storyline in your life. And so thank you for sowing seed, Karen, into what is now work and ministry for me. We, as Karen said, I am, my wife and I are in Atlanta now, in the really urban core of the city. I am looking out the window now onto the roof of the house that Dr. King was born in. I'm not even a block away from where his body and his wife's body lay. The bedrock of what was the civil rights movement, what the neighborhood that bore a phenomenon like a King that made it possible for this this prodigy to really be born, was this fabric, this rich fabric of place that had produced the likes of him multiple times over, and a wife that he would later have that developed a corporation that cared for people in place in a way that just preserved, restored, and developed community, so that not just the legacy of a man would be preserved, but the fabric of community, because that place played such a rich role in the heritage of a people. She was so brilliant to recognize that was the case, that not only did she push to have the National Historic Park here in the city, named in his honor, where his body lies, with the museum, but she also had the brilliance to think about people in this community, and that the fabric of the community would be protected by way of housing and education. And so this sweet home that my wife and I got to build in 2012, Mrs. Coretta Scott King's corporation were the builders of this home. She not only thought about, like her husband, theologically, how to care for people and ensure that they would live life well and that eternally. But then also, she thought practically about what does that mean in the here and now as people experience American life. How can we ensure that that American dream is afforded to all? That enamored me when we got to Atlanta, which was supposed to be for a few short years while my wife did her residency fellowship at Emory University, and then we were going to be out of here really quickly. But we fell in love with city, we fell in love with place. I began to do this work of first city planning and then back into community development in the nonprofit and faith-based world. And before I realized that we were being catapulted into history, really, that I was being mentored by giants in American history like Congressman John Lewis and Andrew Young. And I still am blown away when they walk into meetings or I'm sitting on a phone call or sitting in the office of that I get to be a part of living history. So what was for me when I arrived, something that I thought about in history books or in African American lit, it became real life and tangible to me. And that kind of awe-inspiring energy and zeal took hold of my life and work, and I wanted to be a part of what I discovered, you guys, was the literal beloved community. That what Dr. King gained while doing his doctoral work in this fraternity of this philosophy of the beloved community, for him was a literal geographic location. It was this neighborhood that I'm sitting in. It was the reality for him and time and history that it could be possible for all men to actually see themselves created equally. That we could be really truly endowed with this inalienable right, and that we could actually remove the lines of delineation that divide us so often, and push past this fear, this palpable fear of other, and into an ability to see the humanity in other and then pursue relationship, community, or common unity with one another. And crazy as I have been at times, I said yes to that. And my wife said, I'm giving you 3 years. And then if this doesn't work, we're out of here. And that was 2012, 13, and it's 2020, and we're still here. It really, for me, has been a journey, the likes of which, again, I am blown away at times, but also a burden that really grips my heart. And in the last few years and the last few months, the last few weeks, last few days, has challenged me to the core. And so I want to shape just our time together around these, around fear and how fear can handicap us. And it can also empower us to thrive in ways in which we could never see ourselves or imagine ourselves doing or being. And and then to ask the question at the end, which side of the fear coin will you hold and use? And this sermon that Dr. King did, it had 4 antidotes. And for our conversation tonight, I want to use 2 of them. One being acknowledgement, and then the other awareness. And so that we can engage, and I'll have to keep being told to look down at the chat box because I'm known for not looking at the chat box. But I would love to hear when you think, I'll start with the acknowledgement and awareness, and then we'll come back to fear. When you think acknowledgement or awareness, what are attributes of the two of these? What does one embody when thinking about a keen sense of awareness or an ability to acknowledge?
I think about both being like really present. Oh wait, do you want us to use the chat or talk?
No, I would love to do this way. I was just following suit. With,
I think about if someone has a distinct ability to both be aware and to acknowledge, they're usually like very present with both people and in the places that they are. So they're just attuned and they're fully invested in the here and now in the moment.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Come on, Charlotte. Someone else. I saw, wait, you're gonna make us read, huh? Karen said, yes, bringing a body feel into consciousness. And then McMahon says, I think about open eyes like outward facing. Yeah, wow. You're muted, Karen.
I'm such a Zoom cliche. You're
the Zoom tagline of the year, man.
Oh man, but I think we're the size of our group. Like I think we really do have the flexibility here to speak up. So feel free to jump in, and I think that might feel like a better conversation. So don't be shy.
Yeah, Karen, since you're talking, elaborate a little bit on bringing a body feel into the consciousness.
Wow. What I think is that fear, we feel it in our body whether we're aware or not. So I think fear is present. And so when I think about awareness, I guess I think maybe my body is aware, and maybe then acknowledgement feels more like an intellectual, sort of goes from awareness, maybe a feeling and I don't know, like a mindfulness about it. And then acknowledgement might be really owning it, or you know, like John said, open, outward facing, kind of owning it with another person potentially. I don't know. That was just what came to my mind.
Well, I love it. McMahon, do you want to add anything to your good lyrical, I think, open eyes and
no, I mean, I think that was just the image that came to mind initially, was this just like when you think about acknowledgement, there has to be a certain degree of like of seeing what's in front of you, of just being able to observe and maybe just being willing to observe in some ways. That's just what came to mind initially.
That's so good. A willingness to observe. Part of why I ask these questions is so I can like steal some of the language for next writing pieces. Someone else. And we can do acknowledgement and awareness. And note, I don't mind sitting in silence and staring at the screen. So
I think that this is kind of simple, but like the first word that popped into my head was recognition for both of them, I think. But the more I think about it, I think I most often use the word awareness in the context of self-awareness, which I think is kind of like a recognition of who you are and where you're coming from. So it's harder for me to distinguish between the two words because I think I don't hear acknowledgement within the same context as often. So that was wholly unhelpful, but that's what I think of.
No, it's not. I don't believe that there's an unhelpful. Yeah, that was very much helpful. Jen, I'm gonna call on people now too.
And we have a comment. Max says, I think both require a certain amount of vulnerability, asking you to leave your comfort zone in order to take in something unfamiliar or unknown.
Yes. I hope you have copyrights because I'm taking all of that. That's really good.
I was thinking, like, for both words, noticing was what came to mind for me. And I think awareness kind of has to do with, like, it's in your peripheral, but acknowledgement is like saying, like, this is there, and, like, you're actually, like, it's at the forefront of your mind.
That's really good. On my screen, there's a bottom tier of people. Sam, MD,
Hi.
and Ryan. So.
Yeah, I've been mulling over this because I feel like I generally use the term acknowledge when I'm talking to other people. Like when someone's sharing their opinion, maybe we're having a discussion and they say like a fact that I hadn't necessarily considered. It's like, oh, I acknowledge that. Like that's very true. Now I have to consider that. And to me, like acknowledgement has like a validating sense to it. Whereas awareness is just, as Jen was saying, kind of at the periphery, it's kind of floating around, like I'm aware of it, it exists kind of in my life to some extent. But I think to me, at least, acknowledgement has a bit more activeness to it.
I was just thinking, sometimes when people ask me to consider words, it immediately comes to my mind how bad I'm like, oh man, that's something I haven't thought about in a while, probably because I'm bad at doing that. And I was just sitting here thinking about how I've talked before, like in therapy or with like different friends when I was like going through something. I was like, oh, I'm having a really hard time. Like I'm very prone to compartmentalization. And I always describe it as like Marie Kondoing my life, like just tuck everything away neatly and nicely. And that I really want to jump to like awareness, like, oh, I'm aware of this emotion, or I'm like aware of this fear in myself, and then I can shuffle it away. But I really need to spend more time on the acknowledgement portion and like sitting with things. Like when I think about acknowledging, I think of it as something that's, for me personally, like more of like a time intensive kind of like emotional exploration of like, oh, acknowledging like this thing in me or in like my reaction to a situation, and then like using that acknowledgement as like a catalyst to really like break down why I feel that way.
That's good. You're teeing up really well. Sigmund Freud says, I'm going to switch and just talk a little bit about fear, but Sigmund Freud says normal fear protects us. Abnormal fear paralyzes us. Normal fear motivates us to improve our individual and collective welfare. Abnormal fear constantly poisons and distorts our inner lives. Our problem is not to be rid of fear, but rather to harness it and to master it. And that this idea of acknowledgement and awareness become these key and essential um, components, antidotes, if you will, to fear that grips and paralyzes and poisons. And with this healthy sense of fear, acknowledgement and awareness begins to do what each of you you described, right? It's gives you the ability to see with clear and open eyes that which is right in front of you. It allows you to feel and experience with your body in a way that even when the tension is there of the unknown, you don't flight. There isn't a flight desire to leave, right? But you stay and live into, lean into that tension. It creates vulnerability in a beautiful way, and it allows you to be able to own your presence in such a unique way that you begin to have beautiful add value, and you begin to receive from that of others, and oftentimes in the most unlikely places and ways. My colleague and I have taken this journey together, and he inspired by he says inspired by my life when we became friends when I first moved here. We lived, whether at the University of Virginia or here moving into Atlanta, into places and spaces that were white space. By that I mean majority culture. And we intentionally displaced ourselves as African Americans into these contexts with mission and vision. That mission being to live proximate to other, so that we could build relational equity in a way that allowed people with the same pedigree, if you will, same upbringing, same education, same vacation locations. Caroline, and I don't know if your family does this, but Rosemary Beach and Alice of, these beautiful top of Florida beaches, right? That we realized very early on in our journey, and this is my dad's life in Charlottesville, that it was very uncommon for our peers, whether at the university or peer in our middle class neighborhood where my parents' parsonage was for First Baptist, to have relationship outside of themselves. Save maybe one friend of a different race, right? Or if they had multiple, it was kind of one friend in one race, one friend in another, one friend in another. And so I have like a lot of ethnic friends, but it's like, oh, you only have one from each, but all feeling like I've done my due diligence, right? And we realized that most of this came by way of fear of other, right? And so we naturally, as humans, gravitate toward that which is most like us because there is this learned fear. Most children only fear loud noises, right? And they cry from, and or hungry, right? They'll sit and pee and poop for a really long time. But there is this response. All of the other fear is learned. It's environmentally learned, right? And so we realize that that's the case. And so intentionally, we wanted to displace ourselves and live into that, so that as our friends at Passion, our friends on our block, our friends in my workplace, as they went and engaged with other and leaned into the fear, it wouldn't be from a place of I've never had, or I don't know what it's like. Because you have this relational equity with other that you can lean on. Does that make sense? And so we committed to that in this way that began to shape us, but also shape other. What we hadn't planned for were the things that would be byproducts of that living with proximity. And what came by way of that was an understanding that there are systems and structures that we all just live into as Americans, that we just believe are, we are taught to believe that these American systems are right and they are just. And in Atlanta, where unlike Charlottesville, we, the educated elite minority in Charlottesville, came to Atlanta, and elite educated minorities are a dime a dozen. We are in a city where minority is the majority, and the upwardly mobile, those in wealthy, upper middle class are in a high percentage, right, in Atlanta. And so it was commonplace, and we thought, this is going to be beautiful. We can just settle into this and we'll live these like lives, and we can exhale, and finally we won't be the only. And then what we discovered by this proximity to others like ourselves was that, oh wait, we are not exempt from the realities that come with the skin that we cannot take off. Atlanta is, Caroline will gladly tell you this, it's still in the South. We are center of the state, but in Georgia. And where it is beautiful to walk from Buckhead to all the way down to the bottom of past the airport to Peachtree City, Karen. But we, and to see the diversity of people, right? Socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, all of this. But at the same time, if I drive, Karen and I talked about this earlier today, an hour and a half from here, if you drive 3.5 hours, 3 hours and 45 minutes, you'll be standing on the street that Ahmaud Arbery was killed, murdered, while just simply on a jog. And so it's a place where you feel the sense of, while everyone believes that we have climbed this ladder of a success, we've done the right things that the system says that makes us trustable, if I can use that word, right? Trustworthy, that makes us and removes the fear factor from me. I live proximate life with my neighbors. And so they know me deeply, right? I affectionately call my wife Dr. Evie because she earned it. And they know that about her. And still simultaneously, it doesn't change the fact that, you know, if I, as a brown man, am without my wife or my daughter running on the street in the city of Atlanta, there will be people who don't look like me who will quickly move or quickly grab their purse. And in my neighborhood that I'm known as the mayor of, I want to shout every time, do you know who I am? In response to this just truth and reality about the systems and the structure that we live in, right? James Baldwin talks about this reality that all of us are born, all minorities. We are born into the American world and dream with this handed to us reality, if you will, that we have to learn how to abide with the system and the structure so that we can be successful so that we can survive, so that we can be thought well of. And if we do, we might achieve some measurable sense of success. My colleague Sean would say about the same system that he was taught that the system is right and the system is good. And if you work really, really hard, you will be afforded all of the benefits of the system. And so when he and I began to take apart that system that we both realized we were taught from kids is necessary and critical to our success, when we both began to unpack the historical, cultural, and social contexts that we each bring to the table of viewing that system, we realized, holy crap, if this was not theological horizons, I'd say it the other way. This system wasn't set up to, and it wasn't me who was the first person to say it, it was Sean, this PhD in theology guy. He's like, holy crap, this system wasn't set up to benefit even you, upper middle class brown man. Like this, I need a break. I need to walk away, right? And then when we came back to the conversation, he was like, I was gripped with fear because all my life I had said, no, the system is what it is and it's set up to benefit everyone. And if you just work hard enough, you can do it. And so I began to view people on an individual merit system. If the system is failing you, it's because you have done something wrong or something different. And in our work, we would say that the narratives that we believe about people in place, they deeply impact how we go and engage with people in place. So in a polarized moment like we are in now, today, it's no wonder that everyone is doing the shouting head at each other, right? And trying to pin this as a political issue, a theological issue, a race issue, right? And I would argue in this that it really is a cultural issue. And our inability to step into it is rooted in fear that has been turned on the opposite side of the coin, that's destructive, instead of fear that galvanizes us and unites us and causes us to lean into the tension and understand deeper the cultural narratives that have shaped and defined who we are, and then begin to propel us into an understanding of how we live out what Dr. King talked about in the beloved community, a place that would remove those lines of delineation between us and create a mutual commonality between us, right? Where we would care for all of humanity's thriving and flourishing. When you begin to think about fear, and in light of these topics around the pandemic and race and all of the issues of the day, which we don't have enough time to unpack, but let's couch them in this idea of an acknowledgement and awareness, right? These antidotes for wrong fear and empowerment to right fear. What are your thoughts? And there's no right or wrong. It could be just the top of your head thought, or hey, I've been processing this, and you've prompted this in me thought, or question as well. There's room for all three. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. And it's something that I've sort of struggled with, just seeing a bunch of different opinions from people. And you talk about moving into an area where you were the other, so you were moving into a white space. And I'm just sort of wondering what that sentiment has to say for this idea that it sort of is the onus of Black people to educate white people and the onus of Black people to move into white space. But on the other hand of that, I'm also considering just the difficulty of a white person trying to move into a Black space. Like a white person, I would personally see that as maybe culturally insensitive to like try and move into a space where I am the other. But I'm just sort of caught in this in between of I don't feel like it should be on African American people to make this change, but I don't know if it is quite right for a white person to try and make that change. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. And there's so much in it. And I'm looking at the clock like, we don't have enough time. So I would say this in a couple of ways to address the three that you have brought up. One, I want you all to hear me say most. I think it is imperative that we each, I want to grab some, pull it back to you to answer your question. We each think about our own personal cultural backdrops, meaning our cultural story, right? So that you who are of Euro Caucasian descent and have been afforded the beautiful privilege of like understanding who your family was before America, you have the ability to help most of the majority of white Americans who don't think about that they inextricably tie their identity and culture to like what it means to an American, to be an American, right? That there's not a cultural identity side of that, right? When that is not true, but the systems and structures that we have built, sorry guys, hold on a second. Hear me? Yes? Okay, great. I switched off of my identity.
Yeah,
So that
the last little bit of what you're saying, sadly.
Try again, Donell.
Okay.
We lost you. Oh, Katie.
Ditto, Katie.
What? Oh.
Oh. Oh.
Is he all totally gone? No.
What are we now?
We're nothing. He was just getting to the part.
I could feel it. I could feel
I
it.
know. I was like, I need this.
No, finish that sentence.
I love listening to him speak. Is that weird?
Well, I want to tell you while we're waiting for him to reappear that we'll put on the Theological Horizons website, we have a Cafe Nights page.
Yeah.
And I'll be
Do
sure,
we?
Caroline, yes, we do.
Yeah.
And Caroline Carr will help us post a couple of these long conversations that Donell has had with his colleague on a lot of these questions, and they're really deep and wide. And hey, Donell, you're back. I'm recommending these video conversations that even can be recorded. So I know our time is limited, but there's a lot there, to help us hear more.
Yes.
Anyway,
So check out those. They will give you a more deeper dive and kind of wider in breadth of these three my response to your three asks. But the most important thing I want each of you to hear is that you have a cultural identity, and that in order to enter into, whether with your question of what does it look like or what does it mean for whites to think about moving into African American contexts, we in the city planning world call that gentrification. And they're at its original intention and the core, it is meant to benefit a place. The coming in or transplant of people to bring about health and vitality and change, at its core is gentrification. We use it in a very different context now, right? And so there is value to that being the case. In Atlanta, it happens a ton, and there are others who would be on this call would say, no, that's not in value because you take away the cultural identity of the people who live there. But I would say if you redefine gentrification, whether into me being moving into a majority context or majority moving into a minority context, if you have a healthy understanding of your cultural backdrop, and if you are doing the work, second in that is doing the work of understanding the cultural backdrop of other, so developing cultural competency.
Yeah.
Then what you have now is an ability to really enter into authentic relationship, right? Because you now have a working understanding, a working ever evolving equity of relationship, right? And this allows you to have a solid foundation to begin to enter into these really hard to traverse spaces and places. So I wouldn't, there's so much that you could unpack about those questions and why it's hard to go into. I would couch it in, most often we don't have a clear cultural understanding of our own cultural background, right? The historical, social context. And then secondly, we don't do the work to understand the cultural backdrop of other. We simply assume that because we each live in America and we all are part of or pursuing or desire the American dream, that's good enough. That's all I need to know about you. So when I come to do well by you, especially in the Christian context, we try to layer what we believe about the American dream and the system of America onto the biblical context. And that becomes the first era of our ways. And so stepping back to understand those first, now we are rightly equipped with the tools to really enter in, I think, into a holistic, a really beautiful theological understanding of who we are. And we are now more equipped to bring all of ourselves to bear in that moment or journey. I'm going to stop because we're out of time.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess we are out of time. Caroline Carr is going to do our show and tell tonight.
Yeah.
But so I'll give it to her, and then we'll circle back to let you say your final word, Donell. So you've got a couple minutes to come up with a big send-off and challenge or invitation to us.
Well, I also, before I do, Donell, every week we do a student show and tell, which is just like show something from your life or tell something about what's going on with like you and your person and your place right now. But I also just wanted to, what you're saying, really resonate with. I also didn't tell you this earlier, but I just graduated from architecture school. And so I talk a lot about planning and, you know, a lot of the terms you're using. But I also, through Theological Horizons, have been very lucky to kind of become a student of John Perkins and his teachings over the past couple of years. And what you're saying so much, I think, really resonated with when you deep dive into what he talks about when he talks about relocation. It's kind of one of his 3 R's of ministry. It has always like touched me so much as somebody who is in the architecture planning field. And I'm like, that's what I think. I feel like, you know, like obviously gentrification is like defined by what it has become in like the actuality of our culture. But what you're saying is like when you talk about the difference between like purposeful relocation versus like gentrifying an area, which I have 1,000,001 opinions about and don't have time to go into right now. It's really interesting to think about that. So I thought that was super interesting. But for my show and tell, guys, I just wanted to show y'all the books I'm reading right now, just as like a part of like just what I'm trying to read at the moment. So the first is Dark Star Safari by Paul Thoreau. 10 out of 10 recommend. Sammy, you may really like it. I feel like this author, he travels from Cairo to Cape Town. He's a travel writer. Entire continent of Africa, which is very interesting. It's a very different white account of Africa than I've ever read. And a mentor of mine gave it to me. And it's not an easy read, but it's a good read. But have just kind of finished some literature from different Nigerian and West African authors, and then wanted to read kind of a white take on the continent. I was supposed to be moving to Senegal in September, and I'm moving there next year. And then I've also just started Known and Strange Things, which is kind of a collection of short essays. But the reason I really want to show this was a friend sent it to me, and she put all these funny photos of us from college in it. This is really embarrassing, but and it was really just a note to say, find something that makes you happy every day. Part of that for me is reading, and check in on your friends. Getting this in the mail with a note in it, and like, I mean, really silly photos of us from college was like brought tears to my eyes. And for various reasons, it's just been a really hard couple months for a lot of people. So check in on your people, you know, send them a book in the mail, and they'll probably start crying if they're like me. Yeah, that's my show and tell for this week. So
thank you so much. That's really beautiful. Yay. Bravo. We all say yes. Well, Donell, I'm going to take us out with a blessing, but before I do that, what would be your word to us, or blessing, or prayer request, or challenge, whatever you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think I would leave you with a call to action. I would say this: proximity matters. And I would shape that in, there's an amazing author, now friend, Ryan Stevenson, who wrote and produced the movie Just Mercy. And he talks about a story from his childhood of his grandma, and how his grandma, when he and his cousins would all go there, that she would accost them and grab them and pull them close and squeeze them really, really tight, and then let them go. And she would ask, Ryan, do you still feel me close? And if he would say no, she would grab him again and hold him really, really close. And he said, over time, as a kid, I would actually say no because I wanted her to hold me again. The lesson that she taught him in that was that, Brian, you can't understand things from afar. You have to come close. So proximity matters. If you want to understand, the first step is stepping into that cultural competency, right? And one of the safest spaces is to read and view, but then you've got to come close. And you've got to take that step. And you've got to not let fear handicap you, but let fear be the catalyst. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Amen. Wow. Do you know that Brian Stevenson was with John Perkins this morning?
Yeah.
I will get you the Zoom if you haven't seen it, y'all. They did there.
Yeah, I was there.
Were you on that call?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's early in the morning, Donell.
I've been at John Perkins' house and like sat on his floor for those Bible studies, which is something I'll never forget. That every morning I was like, my goodness, how are you doing this? At 30 a.m. Bible studies. They're amazing.
Well, we will share that because not all of us are as dedicated as Donell. But Donell, you have blessed us. Thank you for helping us learn to listen, and for giving us first steps and just this time together. You know, it's not proximity, but it's something, and you've really brought your heart to us, and we're so grateful. and to each of you for being here together in this space. So may the Lord Christ go with you wherever he may send you. May he guide you through the wilderness, protect you through the storm. May he bring you home rejoicing at the wonders he has shown you. May he bring you home rejoicing once again to our doors. Amen.
Amen.
Love y'all.